Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 21. I can't believe we're 21 now and legal to drink in the United States, at least. And I have a great show tonight. And as you know, the show is dedicated to all things prospecting, but particularly prospecting in the ABL, a 30-team fantasy baseball league, with a glorious 20 minor league spots for a total of 600 prospects, which is quite a lot. But tonight, I am joined by Gabe, who is in two other leagues, not the ABL, at least not yet, including the MLD, Major League Dynasty League, and in the Hammering Hank Memorial League, which is not a league I've talked a lot about on the show, but Gabe and I are in that together as well. So without further ado, I'll bring in today's guest. And here's Gabe. Gabe, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so, we've kind of gone together into two different leagues. We started out together in Hammering Hank Memorial League, which is at this point like 15-team dynasty, I think it is. We're down to, and we started off as 20.
Right.
So hopefully the league is a little bit revitalized this year. We had a lot of turnover, but we'll see how it goes. And that's a hold forever format, rotisserie style scoring. And we're in Major League Dynasty together, which is a 16-team league that has head-to-head roto scoring, and it's certainly something we've been in since inception. We had the startup draft together, and that's been a lot of fun. And I know Tyler from our Hammering Hank League brought us over, both to the MLD, and that's been a pretty robust league as well. So I'm really happy you're on the show, and I know you're a Reds fan.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm a Cardinals fan, as you know, and so we can talk a little bit about that as well.
Well, so is Tyler. He's a Cardinals fan, so
he is.
Yes, I guess I'm outnumbered.
Yeah, but that's all right. It's all right. It's not like we're Yankees fans. So it's okay. We're not gonna beat you up in the parking lot. It's okay. But really interested in hearing some background about your Dynasty League experience. But before we do that, I understand that you have a Joey Votto story. And I'm wondering if you could share that with us, because I love Joey Votto, even though he's red and I'm a Cardinals fan. I think he's a terrific ball player. He's obviously going to go to the Hall of Fame. And I did notice that he's in your minor league system in Hammering Hank. So I love that.
Yeah.
You got a spot dedicated to the 40-year-old. But tell us your Joey Votto story.
Yeah, so I didn't meet him, so it's not that cool. But we went to, this was years ago, probably at least 10 years ago. We went to the Reds game with my family, the four of us. And it was, I think a weekend. It was like the first 1,000 random fans, or no, 500 random fans of all the people that go get a Joey Votto autograph.
Nice.
So I think it was like a couple thousand photos of Joey Votto just free, and like 500 will be autographed. And so we sat down, and all four seats, and we all opened our Joey Votto thing at the same time, and all four were autographed.
Oh, wow. You had more than the trifecta.
Yeah, so I don't know if they were like distributed randomly, or I think they gave the whole stack to the usher in our aisle or something. But so I have one I kept. I gave one to my dad, another one to a friend. I think I have one or two that I kept, but and it's in my basement hanging up. So it was just, I don't know, being a Reds fan and being a big Joey Votto fan, that was just, didn't expect the autographs. So that was cool.
It's interesting. The ballparks all do these, fan gimmicks that we'll call them, but they actually mean something to the fans.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
The easy ones are the bobblehead, day
Right.
or whatever. But like when you have the memorabilia and there's actually a moment to have some kind of connection to the player, which may seem kind of trivial to some people, but to a real baseball fan, having something that Joey Votto touched and autographed and that you can hang somewhere or display, like, really makes a difference.
Right. Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it keeps you connected to the game. So I have a fun Reds related story about a slightly older ball player for the Reds, Pete Rose, who is obviously infamous for betting on baseball and suspended, but the all-time hit king leader is somebody I had the opportunity to meet at a networking event.
Wow.
And he was a very colorful personality. Let's put it that way. Pete is very outspoken, and he does not mince words.
No.
Provided for a very colorful evening, and I'll relate stories that he told me, which are still PG-13, but they're borderline. So, but they're safe for children to watch. So Pete told me that when he was a young ball player, and it was during the Vietnam War, during the off season, Major League Baseball asked if he'd go over to Vietnam to meet the troops. And it was one of these goodwill gestures, to boost morale overseas. And so he was paired with Joe DiMaggio.
Wow.
Who at this point was retired, to go over there and meet the troops. So they get on an airplane, and it's a really long trip to Vietnam, as you might imagine. And they're flying out not only to an airport, but into the jungle. They're actually going to go meet the soldiers out in the field, right? So they're going to some Marine encampment, in Vietnam. So it's a long trip. And it's uncomfortable. It's a long day, and it's hot because it's Vietnam. And so they get to this place finally, and DiMaggio turns to Pete Rose. And Pete Rose is just a kid at this point, right? And this is Joe DiMaggio, right?
Right.
DiMaggio says, I want a shower. And Pete says to Joe, I'm not sure they have those out here because they're literally in the middle of the jungle. Well, it turns out they do. They have a shower stall for the troops. But the way you take a shower apparently out in the field is you stand in the shower stall and some other dude pours hot water over you through, with buckets. So Pete Rose gave Joe DiMaggio a shower. Okay. And what he relayed is he said he felt very bad for Marilyn Monroe, who DiMaggio was married to at the time, because he said DiMaggio had 3 legs. So you don't get that kind of intel just anywhere.
That's something Pete would say.
Yeah, but it is something Pete would say. So good for DiMaggio. Yeah, the guy could hit. So there's that story, and then I'll tell you one more story he told me that evening, which is very colorful. So he's in Detroit for the All-Star game, and the players at that point in time in the '60s, with the National League and the American League, there was a real rivalry in the All-Star game. So the National League ball players are going out to dinner the night before, and he's with Hank Aaron and Willie Mays.
Wow.
Okay, at dinner. Not a bad trio.
Yeah.
Right. So Mays, who's always very kind of put together, and he has a double-breasted suit. He always dressed nicely. He goes out to the bathroom. He comes back, and his pants are soaking wet. And Rose says to him, "What happened?" And Willie Mays relates that he was standing at the urinal, and a fan comes up next to him and turns and says, "Oh my God, you're Willie Mays!" But as he turned, he turned his whole body.
No way.
Urinated on by this man. So,
oh my
nice dude.
Yeah.
It didn't clock the guy, but so that's my those are my 2 P Rose stories. And I have an autographed baseball from behind me, from that evening. But
that's cool. Yeah, I speaking of Pete Rose, every time I see one of those baseball players or football players doing a DraftKings commercial.
Oh yeah,
you could just see, "Hi, I'm Pete Rose, and I use DraftKings."
He should be sponsored by the whole thing.
He's just ahead of his time.
He was. Yeah, if it was this era, only his interpreter would get suspended. So, well, let's transition, because I could talk real baseball all the time.
Sure.
We'll transition into fantasy baseball, and prospecting in particular. And I'm always curious to hear when guests come on for the first time on the show, a little bit of background on kind of what your dynasty experience has been, and how it's evolved over time, and maybe how your thinking about prospecting has evolved over time, given that experience. We can get into kind of what sources you relied on early on, and maybe where you are now, or how you think about prospecting. But why don't you share with us in the audience kind of what that background is, because it's always interesting to hear people's perspectives.
Yeah. So a lot of people, started off with a real simple fantasy baseball league years ago, and really enjoyed the roto style scoring. It was just obviously a lot more work than, people more familiar with fantasy football, or it's
Yep.
one game, one day a week kind of thing. But I really got into it, started getting to know some of the players because we didn't grow up with a baseball team in Indiana. And so, we had like the NBA and NFL, but no MLB. So I didn't like have a team as a kid really.
Yep.
But once I got a little older into high school, I started following the Reds because they were on TV and they're the closest team. They're 2 hours away. Chicago is like 5. I think
Mhm.
St. Louis maybe 6 hours, something like that. So it was easy to go down there, get a cheap ticket, cheap parking, not a lot of traffic. So I started watching the Reds. That's and that kind of helped me, I guess, get to know more players and more teams and just follow baseball more. And so doing fantasy baseball just kind of helped to further that. And it was a league that I had as, Tyler,
Uh-huh.
he got me into all this. So we used to work together and in an office, and he said, so that's how I met him. And then we did a league together, just like a year, basic like redraft league. And he said, "Hey, let's try a dynasty league. If you'll, he said, let's co-own a team."
Uh-huh.
And so that's how we started it. We went through the draft, didn't know what we were doing. We were using new to Fantrax, new to like, we had the Fantrax rankings. We were like Googling other people's rankings, and we would usually try to come to a consensus on each round because we were kind of the same knowledge level of baseball. We were just learning. And then I think after like 20 rounds, we started just taking turns. It's like, all right, you get the next pick. All right, you get the next
Right.
pick. And so it was just, and those drafts take a long time, and it was just a lot of fun because we're like learning as we go. And we still have that team. He's dropped out this year. He's trying to manage less teams, but I kept it.
Uh-huh.
And we've improved that league. We started off like bottom of the league first 2 years, but last year we're kind of middle of the pack. It's just like a 16 team roto, pretty standard.
Yep.
And so we did that for 1 year, and then he was like, "All right, I'm going to create a new league with my buddies, like 12 guys." So we did that, and that didn't last very long. People
Uh-huh.
weren't that serious. I think it lasted a year, but maybe 2. But then it just kind of grew from there, and so I started. There was like, that was a 16 team league, a 12 team, and then I started, just reading about a lot more prospects and getting deeper with it. And so then it was like the Hanks League the following year, which was
Uh-huh.
20 teams. And then I did the same year, I did a 30 team league because I wanted to see what that was like,
Yep.
and get deeper with it, And so, and then eventually it's like, well, I want to try an auction league. And so that's been a lot of fun. I'm in 2 auction leagues now, and they're different.
Yep.
One of them we're in together where that's major leagues, right?
Yep.
So the salary goes up each year on a player. And then this other one I have is interesting where there is an inflation sort of salary increase based on the player's stats each year.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But then we also get a salary cap increase each year. So it's
Got it.
pretty wild. And the contracts are 3 years. It's complex. It's complicated. I mean,
Right. Right.
but yeah, it's fun. I love it. And that one is probably one of my better ones. But and the other thing too is like once you draft a league and you follow these players and follow some prospects, and maybe you got lucky on a few picks, or maybe you had a few bad picks, but it's like you feel more experienced, you feel more knowledgeable, and then you want to like start a new one.
Yep. Yeah, you want to apply what you learned and like leverage it, right?
Exactly.
It also helps you, walk away from the mistakes you might have made, right?
Right.
Draft, right?
I've never folded on a league, but I just keep opening more, and that's to where we get to where I am today, where I'm in 9 leagues, and I can't keep up with all the prospecting anymore, and we'll get into that. But
Yeah. So
but
let
anyway,
me pause you there and just go back to a couple things you said. So how long ago was it that you and Tyler
2020.
2020. All right, so it's all relatively recent. So you've ramped up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the original prep was going on Fantrax and relying on the rankings, and you're not only drafting major league talent, but I assume also prospects
Yes.
that draft as well, right? And so, what kind of sources have you gravitated to over time, for prospecting purposes? Like, what are your go-to places that you kind of trust or have developed trust in?
Yeah, I've I I keep it pretty simple, and I've gotten more simple over time. Nothing too deep, but I would look at the rankings on Fantrax, and then there was another guy that I followed. I don't know if you know Ray Butler.
Sure, I know, right?
Yeah, I would. There's like a small fee, and he would give you top 200 players, and I loved the context he provided because it felt like instead of okay, we'll rank 500 players, this was like here's a paragraph on why I'm ranking every single player where he's at, and so it kind of gave me more context and like this guy I think has more upside. This guy, maybe higher floor. Um, and I kind of liked that. And then I've always liked more of like the tier sort of system of ranking where to the best of our abilities, projecting where prospects are, and kind of as you get to a point where some guys are at the major league level are pretty much so similar statistically.
Right.
And it's like flip a coin. Do you want like, um, Mookie Betts or Ronald Acuna? I mean, there's some guys that are just you can argue for days. But I remember I got into a debate of like it was right before it was like maybe 2 years ago. It's like Bobby Witt or Julio Rodriguez, and we were
Right.
arguing over which one. And it's like it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
they're both pretty good.
Either one's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's why I kind of like the tiers, because you don't have to worry about splitting hairs of like, these guys are pretty similar. But and that's kind of what I've done. I do. Of course, I love going to Baseball Savant,
Mhm.
and then of course Baseball Reference just for quick information. And sometimes I'll go to MLB sites just to get a different. They're not, of course, that's not fantasy
Yeah.
focused, but just to kind of,
Mhm.
I like getting multiple sources because this stuff is, the prospect rankings can be really volatile. And that's what I didn't fully understand early on.
Right.
So a guy can be in the top 25 and something happens a year later, he's not even in the top 300 or whatever.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, and that's an interesting dynamic that's kind of affects strategy and stuff.
Yeah.
So I've been more of like a buy and hold kind of guy. Number one, just because that was my strategy.
Mhm.
Like I've come from the finance world too, and so I would like look at this as like stock picking.
Sure.
Um,
And
but
you're
I,
hedging your bets too. Like the idea that like the prospects, many of them you can't really differentiate between the two of them. Like so, you can hedge your bets and take like, well, I'm going to take a share here, take a share there of another guy, and
right.
the buy and hold strategy, with prospects can, end up really paying off in the long run.
Well, and kind of along those lines, like Jason Dominguez is one that I've ended up with in quite a few.
I think I
Really?
traded him to you in at least one
Oh, is
league.
that you?
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah. And so, that's just a guy he's still so young and crazy upside. We've been talking about him since he was 16.
Yep.
So it's really long term, but that's one guy. Drew Jones is another I think that I have in that league
Mhm.
too. That I don't really watch the rankings on him. I'm just gonna hold on to him for 3 or 4 years and see what
Right.
happens, kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I think I've talked on the show before about how I don't really use rankings.
Okay.
Like and one of the reasons I don't, and not that there's a right or wrong answer to doing it or not doing it, but my approach is more scouting based.
Mm,
So one of the things I really dislike about rankings is the volatility that you mentioned.
yeah.
And so I've never understood, for example, how somebody can come out with a top 100 at the beginning of the season and a month later have a jiggered top 100. Like, well, they'll change stuff,
Yeah.
a month later. I'm like, well, what happened? You have a month of data? Like that can't possibly mean that prospect X dropped from like 20 to 40. Like
Right.
what that means is your system is garbage. Like you don't really know what you're doing. Like you're just like, oh, he got off to a slow start, so I'm dropping him.
Right.
Um,
I've always had the same thought, and I thought I was the only one, Steve.
no, I really, there can be something from crowdsourcing the rankings. Like if you have like folks you respect, and so let's talk about Butler, because I
Yeah.
actually I've looked at his stuff before. There was a brief period of time where he seemed to have taken some time off,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? And so like he's not been consistent, but when he's engaged, I found him to be really insightful.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, there are two players for me that stick out about him. So several years ago, before Corbin Burns had his breakout season, he had had a very rough prior season, and Butler had this write up of Corbin Burns that was just gushing about him and was saying like, "This is the guy to like go
I
get
remember.
now."
I remember that. Yeah.
And I went on based on that and got him in a bunch of leagues, and he just like obviously blew up.
Yeah.
And another guy that Butler was really high on, and I ended up drafting in a lot of leagues, was Jared Jones of the Pirates. The year that
Yep.
Jared Jones came out, like Butler was like all over him, and just talking about like how he thought this kid was going to be a superstar. And I'm not sure he's going to be a superstar, but he's obviously turned out to be like a pretty good pitching prospect, right? He's a two-way player coming out of high school. Um, a little bit on the shorter side, for a pitcher, but Butler, whatever he saw on him, it turned out to be like, at least
Now he's
legitimate.
with. Yeah, and that's when I was gonna. He's with Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah,
Think of
yeah,
the same guy. So yeah, Ray had him higher than most people, and I ended up trading for him and Hanks, if I recall. I traded like a fifth round pick or something one
right.
early on. I was like, I'll take him, and I ended up dropping him in the
Yeah, yeah,
offseason because I had to make cuts,
yep,
and I was hearing like, well, this guy, he looks like maybe a bullpen guy at best, and
right. And he has relief pitcher risk.
yeah,
But
and then
he's done really well. I mean, I
yeah,
ended up trading him in a bunch of leagues. I have like 0 shares of Jared Jones
me
now.
too,
Yeah, right. And so, it's interesting. You get a guy like Butler, who I don't think a ton of people are plugged into,
right,
but he does look at players himself,
yeah,
and he does have other guys he works with who look at players. And
yeah,
going to your point about having a paragraph write up explaining why he's ranking a player here versus there is invaluable, because you also, for me at least, you also know that it's based on something. It's
right,
based on a live look, it's based on data, and he explains himself. And
yeah,
to me, that's just like so much more useful than
yeah,
a top 100 from Fantrax. That I'm like, all right, like I have no idea like how you arrived at this differentiation.
right.
Um,
Or why he's ranked 30th now and then ranked 130th 2 months later.
right. So I basically throw all those, for me, those rankings out the window. Like so I'm a very scouting driven, coupled with like supplementing the scouting with data, that
Okay.
I think are useful flashpoints, once you have a sample size that I think is meaningful, to that. Um, but as a result, I tend to be, I try to be at least more patient now, because I've certainly cut a lot of players that I was right on or traded
Mm,
early, and then I
that's the
regret it.
thing.
Like, oh, and I've got later in the show, I've got a couple of guys that I picked up on like very early, who are now starting to get some like buzz, and so I'm interested
Nice.
to hear your take about them. So another thing that you mentioned, was how you've had less chance because you're in so many leagues, and it sounds like you're stretched pretty thin
Yeah.
in order to like keep up with the prospecting. And so I'm curious to know how you've been handling that, and whether part of the solution maybe is to cut back on the leagues,
Yeah.
or are you thinking like, geez, I have to revisit my approach and find a way to like remain competitive, in the prospecting aspect of dynasty leagues. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I'm kind of maybe not a pivot point, but maybe a kind of transitioning, trying to figure that out. I don't know
Right.
if I have an answer yet. I will say one thing I've learned so far is that, these leagues, a lot of them don't go on forever. People don't, stick around. They might last 5 or 6 years.
Mhm.
So I think naturally we've had some leagues that were on the brink of collapse this offseason, and we had to replace quite a few people. I don't want any leagues to go away, but if I lose one or two soon, that would be okay.
Wouldn't be the worst thing. I understand.
Just to have less maintenance. Now some of them are best ball leagues too.
Uh-huh.
And one of them is like those are 5-year leagues, so they're just done after 5 years.
Okay.
And those are cool. I like those because you pay all 5 years up front.
Oh,
It's all MLB universe. You can draft yourself if you want to. You can draft whoever. You could draft Trevor Bauer or Bartolo Colon, but
right.
but
Or Joey Votto.
yeah, Joey Votto, and yeah, and it's pretty cool. But so those will go away. But then yeah, I less leagues is definitely. I think I've tried every type of league, and that's kind of what I wanted to do.
Right.
Like I want to try all the flavors. It's like it being at I went to a event with they had like 20 different chefs and they're all giving out samples, and it's like, yep, I want to try them all.
Right. Well, sometimes it's about finding like a sweet spot for yourself, like how many leagues is right, and
Yeah,
what type of league you really enjoy. Like you mentioned, you got really into auction leagues more recently,
yeah,
right? And you've only been at this for like 4 years, really,
right,
right? So yeah, that's quite a number of leagues to be in.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, I've been
Well,
playing fantasy baseball since 1987.
oh, wow,
So
Steve, I wasn't born yet. That's something.
I know, like, I'm an old man. But not Dynasty since '87, but
Okay,
fantasy football since '87. I got into Dynasty a little bit later. It also just wasn't as popular
yeah.
when I first started. But
I didn't even have the internet.
no, we did not. We did not have the internet. So you know what we did? We used USA Today to collate our stats because they had box scores every day.
Wow.
And when you wanted to make a trade with somebody, you had to either call them or write them a letter.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because there was
There's
no
no
email.
email.
Yeah,
There's no text.
no, nothing.
This is blowing my mind right now.
Yeah. So one of my first leagues I was in was a nationwide league with guys from all over the country, and you signed up via a magazine. And then the magazine like emailed you your roster, um, and
Wow, that's cool.
and then you had like letters, like addresses you could send trade offers to or correspond that way.
Really?
Yeah, and if you wanted to, you could exchange phone numbers and like have a phone call. But it was very very different.
Yeah.
And a lot less action, of course. Than we have now. Yeah, the internet's changed everything. But yeah, fantasy baseball has come a long way.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
really cool. You might have explained that on a previous show, but I didn't
I
know
don't know if
that.
I have, but it's
Okay.
it's been interesting to watch the industry evolve and just how many baseball fans have been brought to it because it's so accessible
Mm-hmm.
right now, and it's very easy to proliferate leagues. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that you've gone from like 0 to 9 in like just 4 years is kind of emblematic of that.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think it's easy to kind of overextend yourself pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe you're at that point.
Yeah, yeah. So and I basically I've just the way I've kind of dealt with it. I've gotten kind of lazy with prospecting, and some of because I kind of took an approach when I started with a lot of leagues is, it's take young players and build good prospects, and I'm playing for 2 or 3 years from now, right? And then I'll have
Yep.
my run. And so I'm kind of at that point, and none of it's really materialized. I've not won any leagues, but but
No,
I still have some guys I'm excited about. I mean, I've got Skeens in a couple of leagues. I've got Jason Dominguez, uh, Andy Pages,
mhm.
another guy. I got bunch of Drew Jones, bunch of guys I'm still excited about. But so I'm just kind of riding it out, and just if I do have to, if I have I've been trading draft picks
Uh-huh.
because I don't want to do the research to to figure it out.
I understand. I
So
understand.
that's
Right?
that's how I've adapted.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of just I want to see what the next few years brings because I've still got like Hanks. I've got a lot of young teams.
Yep.
Hanks is a really big. It's a 20 teamer down to 15, but they kept the depth the same, right? And so
Yeah.
we have big rosters, like 4 utility players, I think.
Yep.
And that league, for instance, I had the first pick in that league when it started. So I got Acuna, Otani, and then I ended up getting Lewis Robert, and I've got a good young core there.
Right.
And I've got J Dom and Pages.
Yep.
Tyler actually offered me Barrios for Pages the year before in that league, and that was a hard decline.
Yeah.
Because at the time, but I've always liked Pages. So
Yeah. Well, then you hold them. I mean, one of the interesting things, kind of picking up on something you said earlier about the volatility of these prospects, is that one of the things I have found in dynasty leagues is that you can try to build a young core prospects and wait for them to come up at the same time to like have your dynasty,
yeah.
And one of the problems I found with that strategy is that there are no certain results.
Right.
It's not how the prospects are going to perform, right? So kid comes up, he struggles for 2 or 3 years, maybe he ends up being a perfectly fine ball player, but not a star ball player,
Right.
right? And so I find that many owners, kind of have this view that like I can't trade these guys because they're my core future. Then those guys come up, and you're like, you have a core of mediocrity, or maybe one of the dudes is actually a player, right?
Yeah.
And so in dynasty, there is something to be said for the certainty or the relative certainty of major league talent, the guys who have proven themselves to be productive ball players.
Absolutely.
And so it's really, from my perspective, a balancing of current major league players in terms of your future roster, like, keeping core players at your major league level.
Right.
You can build around. You're not building around the prospects are building around them.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to do it backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
And,
And so,
it's not a strategy hasn't paid off for me yet, but you don't know if the strategy is going to pay off. You have to
no,
wait. That's the other drawback on it.
yeah, you gotta be really patient, and look for opportunities, to add, talent. But one of the difficulties I found that you can get into is that you end up stripping down your major league roster so significantly, they got nobody to trade.
Yeah.
Right. And then, your minor league system gets pretty stacked in terms of
Right.
how the players are supposed to look when they become major league players. And then
Yeah.
it becomes very different. You lose flexibility because in order to improve your minor league system, you really have to be overwhelmed, with the prospect you're getting back. It has to be a material upgrade, right? Going to your point about flipping a coin or the tiers, like, all right, well, this guy wants to offer me like, pick a prospect, like, a guy like, Giancarlo Lara of the Braves, who's a pitching prospect, who I like very much, but he's not a superstar. But like, if I already have 5 other pitching prospects that are the same as him, basically,
Yeah.
why do I make a trade for Giancarlo, Lara? Now, if I happen to have a personal preference for him over one of the other guys I have, maybe, but then I have to cut somebody. Going to your point about having to cut Jared Jones or other players, right? And it becomes a real challenge. So, so in addition to maybe reducing the number of leagues you're in, have you thought about anything else to like, make it easier for you to keep up to speed on prospecting going forward, or is the kind of like, pulling out or having leagues fold on you maybe the best course?
Well, I'm open to ideas. It's the kind of thing where I can just pull up, some rankings and just to know where a guy is, where kind of the consensus maybe is. But like you said, that's not, that's not a lot to go off of. So yeah, I don't. Part of it's time. I'm just busier than I used to be. So
No, I understand that too. Look,
yeah,
life gets in the way. It's like the
yeah,
reverse of the Jurassic Park, quote. Like, life finds a way to script your fantasy baseball team.
right,
Like this show was supposed to be on last weekend, and then 2 things happened. Like I was in the Miami Grand Prix, which was amazing, but I also had
cool.
work, so I had to postpone. Thank you again for the flexibility of moving the show, but like it's just life precedes the podcast, and in many ways, life precedes fantasy baseball. Have you thought at all about like like a subscription service like Baseball America or, Baseball Prospectus?
That would be a good idea. Yeah. Yeah, that would be something I'd probably, if I maybe, maybe not this season, maybe in the off season or next year if I have more time and like, how do I dive back into this? I think that'd be a pretty good path forward.
The reason I suggest it is like I'm a big Baseball America, advocate. They're probably my primary source for all things
Okay.
fantasy. I use other sources as well, but that's my like starting point is BA.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I like them, similar to the Butler discussion we were having earlier, they have actual scouting reports on these players, and they explain what they like about the player, what they don't like about the player, as the case may be, and they assign scouting grades to their various core skills, but also an overall grade.
Yeah.
And so, one very rough kind of rule of thumb could be like, looking at players that have, for example, 55 grades or 60 grades. And so 50 is average.
Right.
That's an average regular. Below 50 is like somebody who's probably not going to be a starter every day.
Yeah.
And then, you get 55, that's slightly above. And then 60 is like an all-star potential. And if it's over 60, then forget it. Yeah, you want that player.
Yeah.
But, if you're just sort of taking a tier approach, right, in a draft, like you just look at, if nothing else, if you want to do no draft prep work, right, and just go to Baseball America and say, like, here are all their like 60 grade players, 55 grade players.
Right.
I'm just going to go down the list. And Baseball America ranks them too. Like they have rankings.
Okay.
But you could, cross triangulate those things. So if you're picking between two 55, great players and they rank one higher than the other, you could just default. That's kind of an easy short-term solution. But I think if you read like the BA, you'd also find it insightful and educational in the sense of like getting to know prospects pretty quickly because they have a short blurb
Okay.
on each one of them, similar to Butler does. It's actually, frankly, more in depth.
Sure.
But it doesn't take up that much time.
Right.
But
I think that would be pretty good next step for me then. I like that recommendation.
So that's something that worked for me because I transitioned from when I first got into Dynasty using a lot of lists, and Keith Law was another guy like I initially was into, who used to write for ESPN and now he's at the Atlantic. But that's a pay service, and I gravitated away from him over time for folks who I found a little bit more reliable. Keith is a kind of a contrarian guy. He has like contrarian takes on players, and I found over time that he was like more often wrong than he was right about some of them. So I stopped like following him. At least that was my observation. There's still some people who really like Keith.
Sure.
But I transitioned away from lists to like scouting reports and BA, and I also use Baseball HQ because they have a minor league forecaster that comes out every year.
Baseball HQ. Okay.
Yeah, but those I used to subscribe to Baseball Prospectus as well, which is a very reputable scouting thing, and they have a similar kind of deal as BA. I just found BA to be a little bit better for me, for my uses. So I didn't feel like I needed like another subscription service. So
Sure.
I let that lapse, but they're very good too. But I find that they allow you shortcuts on players. So you get a trade offer in season, and like maybe it's a guy I've never heard of before or you've paid very little attention to. So the first thing that I just pull up Baseball America and I find the player and what they said about him. And if I'm interested still, I'll do more digging, and if not, I'll be like, no, I'm going to decline that.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, so it's a quick cheat sheet. Like I actually have their stuff downloaded on my phone.
Awesome.
So wherever I am, I can just pull it up. If I get a trade offer, I'm like, okay, let me look at this guy. And like, so that's something that's worked for me.
Yeah, I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, so you can try that and see how you like it. And I can send you something from Baseball America if you want to take a look at it. Just so you have a kind of a sense of what they look like. Before you pay for it. So I'll send you a couple write-ups from them.
Is it expensive? How much is it? Do you know?
I can't remember what the annual fee is. It's under $100.
Okay. So
it's not great. It's not crazy, but something like that.
I pay for MLB TV.
It's not insane. It's not insane. So let's do this. I want to transition into a new segment for the show, which is hot or not. So this is kind of like the dating app situation, right? And so these are 6 prospects that I've picked, and Gabe has not seen these in advance of the show. This is all like impromptu. So you can tell me hot or not. And if you want to add a sentence or two, why you can. And if you don't know the guy, that's okay too. You can say like, I have no idea, right?
Okay.
All right.
I hope I know some of them.
I picked ones that I thought you'd at least know.
Okay.
And then there are a couple you may not, but I'm interested to see if they've percolated up to your
Interesting. Okay.
radar, right? All right. So the first guy, just hide the thing. The first guy was Luis Matos of the Giants. Hot, not, or have you forgotten about him? Former top 100 prospect.
I know who that is. Let me just pull up his face.
Yep. Which is essential for a dating app. I don't have their profile picture. I probably should have added that.
Right. Let's see. I'm gonna say I was never a big Luis Matos guy. I'm gonna say not.
All right, not hot. He's struggling right now at AAA, but has the potential to steal some bases depending on what format you're in and how deep the league is. But yeah, a lot of people are out on Matos. Although I know a couple owners that are still holding out hope that he'll become something. All right, so I got another one for you. This is another guy who was like a list darling a couple years ago and has kind of fallen out of favor, but is having a little bit of a resurgence this year. And that's Zach Veen of the Rockies.
I'm going to say not. I've always thought he got a little too much hype.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So Zach Veen. Zach was a guy that last year I ended the season with a show about buy, sell, or hold prospects. And Zach Veen was one of the guys I chose because he had been so heralded as a prospect coming in from his draft year and had really struggled mightily. And if I recall correctly from that episode, a lot of the guys were saying they were out on him. And it's an interesting question. If you're one of the dudes who paid up for him, really, like you're kind of stuck with him, right? It's like a stock that went into the tank. Like,
yeah, right.
Hold it because you're already in for all that money and wait for the rebound, or do you take the tax break? It's like
exactly.
So I think Zach Veen is one of those dudes. All right. So
I could be wrong. Hope I'm wrong, kind of. Yeah. But I felt like he got everything I would read about him. They kept mentioning Coors and hitting in Coors and Rockies, and I'm like, that's such a small factor for a guy. He might get traded, and I would bring it up to people, and they're like, well, that's not why he's ranked so high. And I'm like, well, why do everybody always mention that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The context for a player can matter, of course, but you're right. I think that banking on that home ballpark, 4 or 5 years later after you're drafting a player is just not a sound strategy.
I didn't think so. But hey, he could work out, and I know that he can have a lot of power. So
yeah, power and speed. We'll see. Like I said, he's making more contact this year, so some people are like promoting him again. I happen to own him in Major League Dynasty League.
Okay.
It will be interesting. I tried to trade him last year for like a low draft pick, and nobody wanted him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to his value as the season progresses. Because if he keeps hitting,
exactly,
so we'll see. All right, so Zach Veen is a not for you. All right, so here's another former darling, Marco Luciano.
I'm still in on Marco.
All right.
I traded for him in 1 or 2 leagues. Hanks, I traded for him in the offseason.
All right.
The kid is so young, and he's got such elite bat speed. If he can just make contact and have some more discipline, I still think he could be a pretty good hitter. And, maybe he ends up being like some guys that still had good careers, but maybe not super like Will Myers Jerkson Profar's played in the league for a while now.
And, he's actually having a nice year this year. The guy that Luciano kind of reminds me a little bit of is Reggie Sanders,
Mm,
which is a name, was a former Red and a former Cardinal. But guy with a lot of power, had some contact issues. I think Luciano's upside is higher.
mm,
But if Luciano's floor ends up being 30 home runs and a 250 batting average,
right. That
you
ain't
know,
nothing.
that ain't nothing. So, and going to your point about contact, I don't know if you've had a chance recently to look at what he's doing in AAA, but
I have not.
yeah, it's quite interesting. Like he's hitting for average. He's making a lot more contact, but no power.
It
So
might be over rotating a little bit.
yeah, so my understanding, and I don't follow him particularly closely. I don't have any shares. Um, I said he made some adjustments to his approach, and what has resulted thus far is he's like got better contact, more walks, but
Hmm.
he hasn't reached into his power, which is quite substantial. That's actually his calling card.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to me to see how he progresses throughout the summer,
Yeah.
because there may be a point where the power, switch goes on,
Right.
and if that is coupled with the contact, he's gonna like be very valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a funny game, you know. Sometimes um it's just a matter of tweaking at this level, and once you figure something out and it clicks, it can be a breakthrough. I mean, Austin Riley was a guy that
Yeah.
I traded away like when he was a rookie
Yep.
because I thought, well, this guy is just he's got power, but that's it.
Yep.
And man,
Turns
that was
out
probably
he's no more than that. Yep.
yeah, probably he found something and he's a great hitter.
Yeah, and he's also an interesting case about being patient with hitters when they come up to the major league level, because a lot of guys do struggle. It's not all like Juan Soto out of the gate, you
And
know.
Mike Trout, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys just scuffle around for a
of
year or
course.
two and then put it together, right? And that's actually more common than not
Right.
with these guys, particularly the younger ones.
Now let me ask you, Steve, over because you've been doing this a lot longer than me. Over the years, have you has that always been the case? Has that always been common when prospects come up? Did you used to see guys come up later, maybe later, but did you see them have like more initial success, but maybe stay in the minors longer? Like, how has it changed since
Um,
'87?
well, putting like service time manipulation aside for a moment, 'cause
Hmm.
that was obviously a factor in holding prospects down for a long
Sure.
time under the prior collective bargaining agreement. Um, I would say that, like, generally speaking, major league teams have been more willing to give young players a chance as salaries have gone up and up and up.
Mm,
Whereas it used to be that major league managers and major league GMs, and this is very anecdotal, I don't know what the data
sure.
actually says, but my,
Yeah.
my impression is that because there was such job security issues for the folks making decisions, lineup decisions day to day, and at the GM level, they preferred guys they knew and guys they trusted on the major league roster rather than a young kid. Um, so certainly more opportunities now for
Mm,
young players. I think. Um, you know, I think the other factor that has intervened is the sabermetrics
yeah.
and really understanding, what kind of performance metrics are valuable and how they might translate to long-term success. So I think organizations have become much shrewder in identifying talent than they used to be, and that relates to prospecting too, because you can see an organization be patient with a prospect maybe who's scuffling a little bit, but they see things that they really like and think are going to click soon.
Right. The
And
underlying metrics.
right, whereas before when people weren't as focused on those things, they might have just demoted the kid.
Yeah, his batting average isn't good, so
Right,
yeah.
he's scuffling, he's not doing this, he's not doing that. I need, like, my utility fielder out there every day or whatever it is, right? So I think baseball organizations have gotten smarter and have looked past some kind of old school philosophies. Like, this is the guy I know. He's a pro, and like he's a veteran. And, he's good in the clubhouse. And meanwhile, this kid who's like hitting exit velocities like over 110 miles an hour is getting sent down to AAA, right?
Right.
Um, so there are always outlier exceptions. I mean, I saw the Mets take a huge risk with Dwight Gooden in 1984. He was 19 years old, and he skipped AAA. I mean, they just put them right into the majors. I mean,
Wow.
and they became very competitive very quickly because of that. They went from
Yeah.
a terrible team in '83 to winning over 90 games for several years in a row. Obviously, a World Series in '86. So I don't know that I think on the whole, prospects are up earlier and getting more opportunity now than they used to.
So I agree, and I hear what you're saying there. But do you think the learning curve is how has that changed for once a guy is called up today in 2024 compared to the average guy being called up in 1997? I
Right.
mean, we know pitchers are throwing harder, and we know the effect. I mean, we had the shift and all that. Putting that
Yeah.
aside,
Yep.
um, I mean, do you think that leap from AAA to major leagues is harder, and players are going to struggle a little more today and just scuffle back and forth, or do you think it's always kind of been that way?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there was actually an article on this, which I didn't. I don't have a pay subscription, so I didn't read it. I just saw the blurb on X come through that there's an article in the Atlantic, I think, about this, about why hitters are struggling more now, prospect hitters coming
Okay,
up. Um,
so it is a
I
trend.
think so. I mean, I haven't read the article, so I can't vouch for it. I just saw the headline.
Okay,
Anecdotally, my reaction to that is that the for the same reasons I identified the game giving prospects more opportunities, the sabermetrics and kind of like the salary structure, I think pitchers have gotten smarter too.
sure.
And coaching has gotten smarter too about like, matchups and like how to like
That's
really leverage the weakness of a hitter. Like, and I'll give you an example that springs to mind for me is Jordan Walker, um, who has shown a real vulnerability to sliders on the outside corner of the plate. He keeps trying to pull him, pulling his hips out, and everybody knows he's doing it. Um, and the major league coaching at the Cardinals couldn't like fix it, so they sent him down to AAA, which is kind of an indictment of their coaching staff, I think, personally. But putting that aside, it's an example to me of like major league teams very quickly weaponizing the data and
yeah,
pitchers just like you know mercilessly hitting him with it. And this used to happen over time in the,
right.
in the past, but I think it was much slower.
It's
Yeah, and now
fast.
it's like it's almost immediate. So you see
Well, another quick example of that, there was a guy, do you remember Aristides
oh yeah,
Aquino, the Reds?
yeah, yeah,
He big power guy at
yeah,
AAA. He comes up, he hits 10 or 12 homers within like his first month of baseball.
yeah.
You know, uh, the power's there. He's making great contact, hitter's ballpark, whatever. After a month, they figured out that he was pulling and just like Walker, and he was swinging at those outside sliders. And as soon as they figured that out, his strikeout numbers just, you know, 35-40% probably stopped hitting homers and went back down to AAA and really never came back.
Yeah, and the other thing you'll see too is that the AAA pitchers have figured it out too, right?
Well, yeah,
Right.
I'm oversimplifying it, but yeah,
Well, yeah, but to your point, right? When he got sent down, he continued to struggle because the AAA pitchers are like, you can't hit a slider.
because now they know.
Yeah, right. They're like bang, bang, bang.
Once somebody figures it out, everyone knows nowadays.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And he's like the real life version of like Serrano in Major League, the movie. Like
Oh
great
yeah,
great
yeah,
straight line to hit power, but can't hit the curveball, right?
yeah,
In
yeah.
his case, is a slider. So yeah, I think there's definitely more opportunity, but more risk for these prospects and the ability to exploit their weaknesses. And there's just very few prospects who come packaged in a way that they're polished professionals right out of the gate.
Yeah.
There's actually a pitcher up right now for the Mets, Christian Scott, who may be kind of an outlier example. He has a very tough matchup today. He's pitching against the Braves here in New York. But he's a very polished pitcher. He's got 4 pitches already. He's got excellent command, good control as well to go with that. And I think those types of prospects, even though his ceiling may not be as high as some of the other guys, tend to hit the ground running more. And a similar thing would be a guy with a good batting eye approach. Doesn't strike out a lot, walks like a fair amount,
Yeah.
hits the ball reasonably hard, makes contact. They tend to stay in lineups, and they tend to the pitch recognition, their approach
And
Really
he might play good defense, and that's going to
right,
keep him in the lineup.
right. So
Yeah.
they have more rope, so to speak. It's the power hitters with like the easy, power, but swing and miss issues that really can get exploited more quickly. Which is one reason Juan Soto was so successful, in my view, is that he has a really great batting eye.
Yeah.
You know,
And that, I mean, Juan Soto, I think he's been like if I had a first or second pick in a league, he's up there for me because it's just hard. It's just so hard to find a guy with that kind of eye. He's always going to be successful, even if he doesn't hit
yeah,
40 homers in a year. He's still going to have a good year.
yeah. He's a little bit like Joey Votto.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're very similar players. Soto probably has more power, but
Yeah.
similar guys. All right, so I got a couple more for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's keep
Do
going.
it, right? So this one, I'm interested to see if you know this guy.
Okay.
He was the Reds minor league pitching prospect of the year last year,
Okay. I probably do.
and it's Julian Aguirre.
Whoa. I have not heard of him.
All right, so this is an interesting guy. Like, so I was curious if he like percolated up to your knowledge. This is a guy.
There's not.
All right, so I've got him in ABL. I don't think I have him in any other league. ABL is so deep; it's a 30-team league.
Okay.
This is not a guy I would normally roster because he doesn't strike out a lot of hitters, but he has really excellent command and control. He just doesn't walk people. And he's got 4 pitches, none of which are spectacular. So he probably profiles as like a 3-4 major league level. In a 30-team league, a guy who's a 3-4 doesn't walk anybody.
That's great value.
Yeah, I'll take that, right?
That's what's fun.
In our 16 league team,
Yeah.
probably not as interested in him. I may at one point have rostered him just to see how he was doing, but he had a great year last year for the Reds. Started getting some write-ups in Baseball America, which is why I rostered him. But just kind of an example of a dude who like is flying under the radar for most prospectors, but is kind of an interesting guy to me at least, in a really, really deep league.
Yeah, that's great. I learned something new because I'm more familiar with the Reds prospects than any, and this one hasn't reached me. So
all right, well, you can go check him out, and he might be in a major league.
I'm gonna say hot since he's a Red. We'll just
there you go. I like it. All right, here's a name you'll know.
All right.
Interested in take on him, Robert Hassel of the Washington Nationals.
Yeah, I'm hot on Hassel, and I think he's hot in AAA right now.
He is. He's having a great year. He's obviously been a kind of a bipolar prospect in a lot of ways. He struggled quite a bit. He was another guy that I had on that buy, sell, hold episode last year.
Okay.
And everybody was dumping on him. They were like, no, we're out. And I think I have him too in Major League Dynasty. But another dude I could not trade last year. So it'll be similar to Zach Veen. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him. But I'm kind of like hot on him now too.
Yeah, I had him when he was first drafted. I wasn't crazy about him because just nothing I read just really jumped out to me. It was just like, yeah, he's a solid player. He can do all things well. I mean, people said the same about Corbin Carroll too, but
yeah, right. He turned out to be all right.
Yeah. And so, but then I kind of like, well, with where I was drafting and everything and how he was being sold kind of low, I scooped him up in 1 or 2 leagues because I'm like, he was a high drafted guy and a top prospect at first. I mean, there's something there. So I'm still hot on him. He's still young. He's got some. I think he can get better.
Yeah, I think so too. Particularly if you're able to get him now, or we're able to get him last year at a really low cost, pick him off the wire. I think he's a great hold right now. I mean, we'll see what happens with him.
Yeah.
And if you're one of those dudes who bought in on him way back when, and you've been holding on to him now, maybe you're getting the stock's going up, right? So there
you go.
All right. So one last one. This is a guy you may not have heard of, but he's starting to get some like notoriety on Twitter, or X as we call it now. He's a Tampa Bay Ray prospect, Braylor Guerrero.
Don't know him.
All right, so I thought you might not, because he's only 17.
Okay.
And he's down in the complex. I actually own Braylor in every league I'm in. So it'll be interesting to see, for me at least, over the summer, like what becomes on him. What becomes of him in terms of the prospect community? Because like if you like go on X and do a search for his name, like people are like going bananas over him.
What position does he play?
He's an outfielder. He's an outfielder. Corner outfielder, and tremendous power. And he can run. So it's a power speed guy, and the question is how much contact he'll make
Mm.
over time. But he's hitting like I think 435 right now, and in the CPX, yes, it's something insane, like with like a 750 ISO. It's like he's off to a good start.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it's like probably 25 plate appearances or something. Some
Yeah.
people are losing their mind, but anyway, he's an
Yeah.
interesting name to keep an eye on over the summer. So for right now, he's not for you, but maybe he'll become a hot commodity down the road.
Yeah, I'm gonna check him out now. Well, the thing is, it sounds like you beat me to him in at least 2 leagues, so
Yeah,
that's
no,
okay.
actually, what? I take it back. I don't have him in MLD because
Okay.
somebody else drafted him, and
Oh, okay. So
somebody
someone beat
somebody
you.
it's the only league somebody beat me to him in. So that's the only league I don't have him in. But Hammering Hank, I have him. And in all my other dynasty leagues, I have him.
Nice.
I'm very high on him. All right, so like the last segment of the show, and we've talked a lot about players that you do like,
Yep.
and I'm wondering if there's anybody else maybe do you like. These are the crushes and fades. Anybody you could say you like more than consensus for whatever
Yeah.
reason or less.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is take when you have multiple leagues is see which guy do I own in every league because that's probably somebody I like more than the consensus.
Right, right, right.
um, well, two pitchers I've never given up on. I never and Tyler makes fun of me for this all the time, but it's when I first got into this, I love these pitchers. They were top prospects. It was Nate Pearson and AJ Puck,
Uh huh.
and you know. Those are both interesting. Puck's had an interesting career so far.
Yes.
And a really funny story is I think it wasn't Hanks where back in spring training, I traded Puck away for Khalil Watson.
Oh wow.
Now, this was before they named Puck a starter, too. So at the time, I thought, well, I still love Puck. He's probably going to close, but I had other closers.
Yep.
I'm going to buy low on Watson. And Puck becomes a starter. And I'm like, well, dang it.
Yeah.
And then he gets hurt and
Yeah.
struggle. So it's just a roller coaster. But they're kind of, they've seen flashes of greatness in both of them, and I just can't let that go. So
Yeah.
I'm,
They both struggled with injury too, which is
yeah,
very frustrating.
big time.
Not unusual for a pitcher, but definitely a real downer, particularly with Pearson, who really had an exciting profile.
Yes, absolutely, and looked really good at times. So those are two pitchers that I've just. I mean, Jay Dom and Drew Jones are kind of two other ones that I'll just probably always hold on to. And I've got them in a couple leagues. I'm taking a look now. Maybe some guys that I've faded on. I was a big. I don't know why I'm bringing up more pitchers, but I was a big Emerson Hancock guy,
Uh-huh.
and I've ridden that out, and he's struggled a bit.
Yeah, no, he's an interesting pitcher because he was definitely pumped up in the rankings for a
Mhm.
number of years, and like he's another guy similar to Aguilar we were talking about earlier. He doesn't strike out a lot of guys,
Right, but he
right?
had a lot of good pitches. He was very polished.
Yeah, and the guys who can't get the Ks in fantasy baseball to me are like unless you're in a really deep league, they become a real burden to you, particularly if you're in a roto category like where you're doing cumulative points, right? Because the strikeouts per inning pitched really matter because if you have an inning cap and you have a guy striking out less
Mm,
than he pitches, like he's basically killing you every time out in the strikeout category. And so I've always been down on prospects who are like that. Now, in contrast, in a 30-team league, I was saying for Aguilar, like I'll take that because, and that's also like
yeah,
point leagues that the scoring is different. But I have more tolerance for a guy like that. But Hancock was just so expensive coming into drafts that I have zero shares.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then let's see. Do I have anybody else here? I'm sure I could. Um, yeah, Christian Encarnacion Strand. I was hopeful for this year. He struggled and got hurt.
Yeah. I mean,
He's
he's
great. He's great defensively.
yeah.
The hitting was disappointing this year. And I thought he'd
Yeah.
have a breakout year.
He could. I mean, look, he's an interesting guy, right? Because he's got the defense, right? So he's going to get another chance.
Right.
And is there an Austin Riley profile in him? I don't know. But that's what springs to mind for me, like a guy who has a lot of power. And if he can figure out how to make hard contact consistently, he could be a very good, Major League Baseball player.
Yeah.
Who's going to play every day because of his defense.
Right.
So, but I understand he's disappointing right now.
Yeah.
So, maybe he's a guy to like buy low on if you can get him. But
for sure. Yeah. And just one other, back to what we were talking about earlier, the volatility and how that can be kind of hard to track and follow. But sometimes, and this probably is more of how some other guys play, I think Tyler's more active in this way, is kind of trying to capitalize on that volatility and trading a lot.
Yeah.
And I've seen it work for him, and I've seen it backfire too. But to play, and it's fun to play that way. Of course, we all like making trades when we think we're making a good one, and but yeah, to grab these guys, buy low and sell high, and just to constantly do that, that's a strategy. And I don't know if it's the best one, but it takes a lot of work.
It
and I
does.
don't have the time for it, but
yeah, I mean,
it'll probably be done.
Yeah, and there have been times that when I've traded prospects, like churn them, and you can get burned. That's what I'll say. You can get burned. There's, and I've said this on the show before, but it's my cautionary tale. I was in on Jackson Chourio when he was 16, and had him in every league I was in. I have 0 shares. Because I either gave up on him too early, or I traded him away when I thought I was getting like the maximum value for him, and he just kept getting better and better. So it's easy in the moment to try to capitalize on a player. So what I've done is really profiled guys that I like. I have a certain kind of guy I go after, and if they fit that profile, I'm going to be going forward very resistant to trading them. And even if I'm going for it a year, like their guys I just probably will not part with, because I've just gotten burned too many times. Where in contrast, if there's a player who doesn't fit my profile but is a hot stock, trade him. I'll pick him up, trade him.
Swing trade him.
Yeah, all good. But listen, Gabe, I'm really happy you were able to come on the show. And thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and your experience. Great having you on. And I will get you some snippets from Baseball America so you can peruse those and think about that as a potential resource, among others that are out there in the world, in this glorious world of fantasy baseball that we live in. Thank you for being the first owner to participate in Hot or Not.
Oh, all right.
We'll see if I bring it back and how popular it is. But I hope you enjoyed it. And for those watching, download later on, remember to always ABP, always be prospecting. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Yeah, of course. All right.